Good day, everyone. My name is Jyothi Unni. I'm going to teach a lesson in English from a textbook which has been prescribed by the NCERT. The textbook is Beehive and it has been prescribed for class 9. This prose lesson is about Albert Einstein. The name of the lesson is A Truly Beautiful Mind, Albert Einstein. Now this lesson redefines the meaning of the word genius. By the age of 26, Albert Einstein had published in quick succession 4 scholarly papers which changed the way we think about concepts like light, distance, space, and even the very nature of cosmos. Almost 65 years after his death, we still regard Albert Einstein as the king of science, more specifically, the king of physics. Now this lesson, A Truly Beautiful Mind, gives a brief sketch about his early childhood, the influences that worked on him, the different schools he went to, his professional excellence and achievements, and his personal life, and finally, his commitment to a very important global matter, which is disarmament and peace among nations. Let's have a brief look at what the lesson tells us. The lesson begins by talking about Albert Einstein's early childhood. Albert was born in a place called Ulm in Germany. He was born on 14th March 1879. His family consisted of his mother, Pauline Koch, and his father, Hermann Einstein. The family also consisted of his uncle, Jacob. When he was born, his mother thought that he was a freak child. The reason being that his head was disproportionately large, much larger than the heads of normal children of that age. Little did she know what was in store for her and her son. He was to go on to become one of the masterminds in science, the greatest masterminds, in fact, that the world has ever seen. The family, that is father, mother and uncle, along with toddler Albert, moved to Munich when he was just 15 months old. At the age of 2.5 years, Albert still couldn't speak, couldn't or wouldn't, we shall never know. And when he did start speaking, he would only utter the same word twice, which didn't make him a very interesting companion or playmate. He much liked to play with mechanical toys and he didn't fancy the company of boys or girls of his age. It is no wonder then that his classmates or his friends called him brother boring. Now there is an incident related about Albert Einstein. Apparently at the age of 3, he sat down to dinner and he said quite unexpectedly for his parents, "The soup is hot." And his parents were absolutely taken aback and they asked him, "Why didn't you speak all these years, all these months? We were getting quite worried about you, Albert." And he said, "Well, up to now, everything was in order." Now that was a pointer to the kind of character that Albert Einstein was to develop in the future. A person, a man of few words, but who observed everything that went around him and processed that information in a way that no other scientist had ever done before. As I said, he was quite interested in playing with mechanical toys and gadgets. He much preferred that to the company of boys and girls who would play with dolls or marbles or chess counters. So much so that when his younger sister Marja was born, he thought that she was just a toy. He moved around the swaddling clothes and looked at her feet and asked his mother, where are her wheels? Because he quite expected her to roll about when she was at the age to move about on wheels, not the pitter-patter of feet for him. He was a quiet boy, not talking much, observing everything, not very responsive, and his parents and his teachers alike thought that he was a little bit dumb, a little bit dim-witted. So much so that one of his headmasters told his mother he's never going to be a success at anything. But his mother was made of different stuff. She determined in her mind that she would make something of her son Albert. She taught him to play the violin. Now, history has it that he didn't like playing the violin. He hated his violin revision lessons. Remember, he began playing or was taught to learn the violin at the age of 6. And he continued to resist playing the violin. But all of this was to change. At the age of 13, he happened to listen to a violin performance by Mozart. And that was love at first sound. He adored playing the violin ever after, and he continued to play till almost the very end of his life. He wasn't a professional player, he was always an amateur violinist, and that was the love that was to stay with him throughout his life. Here we have a picture of Pauline, Albert's mother. We know what they say, behind every successful man there is a woman. And here you're looking at a picture of one such woman who was the first and principal guiding force that led Albert Einstein to become what he was, the legend that he is in the hearts of all generations. There's a picture of young Albert, very adorable, very quiet, very lovable, observing everything that he took in. God knows what was going on in his mind at that time. At the age of 5, he joined school. He first joined the Catholic elementary school. And then he went on to the Louis Paul Gymnasium for his high school. He was 8 years old then. Now, he didn't have a happy time at school. He didn't like the strict rules. There is a word in the lesson, regimentation, which means strict rules, regulations, protocols, lack of independence. He absolutely hated that. He thought that such education, such learning hampered creativity and finding out for yourself what you must from the world around you. He wasn't a happy schoolboy and he was waiting to get out of the school. But history has a way of turning things on their head. Years later, when Albert Einstein became famous and he won the Nobel Prize and he became who he was, the school was renamed after him. It was renamed the Albert Einstein Gymnasium. How about that? That's a picture of Albert as the unhappy schoolboy. You wouldn't think he's that unhappy looking at that picture. That was him at the Louis Paul Gymnasium in Munich. Now, on the personal front, things were going a little bit topsy-turvy. Remember, his parents, especially his father, Hermann, had set up a business in Munich with his brother Jacob. That was a business that manufactured electrical gadgets. Now, they had asked to get a contract with the Munich municipality for lightening up the roads in the municipality. But because they didn't have enough funds or enough capital, they didn't get that contract because they didn't have the initial investment. So they were forced to fold up the business and forced to leave Munich. Did they go back to Germany? Did they go back to where he was born? No, he didn't. No, they didn't. They went instead to Italy, to a place called Milan, and from there to Pavia. Did Albert go with them? Did he leave the school that he hated so much? Not much of a chance. He was told very strictly that he had to continue at the Louis Paul Gymnasium and complete his high school diploma. He didn't like it one bit. He didn't have a choice. But that didn't stop him from trying. Oh yes, he kept on trying to get out of the school, which for him was stifling. He even managed to get a medical certificate from a friend who was a medical student at that time, attesting to the fact that Albert Einstein wasn't in the best of health. And he presented this medical certificate to the school, not a moment too soon, because the school was getting ready to expel him because he was quite an argumentative pupil. His family, as I said, had moved back to Italy. He went with them, but from there he went to Switzerland and he joined a Swiss school called the Cantonal School at Aarau in Switzerland. He was very happy in Switzerland because the atmosphere there was quite in contrast with the rigid atmosphere at the Louis Paul Gymnasium. He was very happy there and he completed his high school diploma from the school in Aarau. Now there you can see a picture of his matriculation certificate. That is really Albert Einstein's matriculation certificate awarded in the year 1879. Now the certificate is a precious document. It tells us that he won amazingly good grades in physics and maths. But he didn't do that well in English. Not to worry, because English wasn't his mother tongue. From the school, he went to a university. That was in the year 1890, and the university is called the Federal Training Institute. This was in Zurich. He was absolutely ecstatic at going to university for two reasons. One, it had an atmosphere of complete independence and creativity. You could learn the way you wanted to learn. No one was going to tell you how to learn and how not to learn. Reason number two, there he met the woman whom was later to become his wife, and that was Mileva Maric. She was a 20-year-old Serbian woman. It was quite a rarity in those days for women to enter universities, and it was even rarer for a woman to choose a subject like physics or maths instead of the softer options of arts. They were soulmates, Mileva and Albert. He found in her an ally with whom he could discuss everything, not just physics or maths, but also the arts. As a matter of fact, he and she would often rail against people called Philistines. There is a word called Philistines in the textbook, which means people who are against art, literature and music. He was fond of science and maths, as was Mileva, but they were also fond of people who loved the arts. So in her, he found a soulmate. Did he marry her right away? Not quite. Let's see what happened to him in 1900. He had graduated from university with a teaching diploma, and that was the year when he turned 21. Did he get a job right away? No such luck. Remember, a brilliant brain like Albert's didn't find it easy to get a job straight out of university. Does that sound familiar? I think it does. Well, later on, he did manage to find a job. Before we go into his first employment, here is a picture of the Federal Polytechnic School in Zurich, which in his own words he described as a lovely corner of the world, a lovely corner of the world. This is Mileva and Albert Einstein. She was his first wife. Was he to marry again? Yes, he was. Now, his mother, Albert's mother, Pauline, a very strong force in his life. She didn't like Albert's choice of a wife. She found Mileva to be too much of an intellectual. Besides, she was 3 years older than Albert, not quite wife material by the mother's standards. And she thought, I already have an intellectual in my son, Albert. I don't want another person who's just like a book always poking her nose into a book and reading. She didn't approve of the match, and Albert did put off that marriage to Mileva for some time. Eventually, he did marry Mileva, and that was in the year 1903, just after he found his first job as a technical expert in the patent office at Bayonne. Now, that was in the year 1902, and what did his job entail? Well, he had to assess and evaluate other people's inventions. Some of the inventions that he got a chance to look at was an electromechanical typewriter. So he got plenty of time to wonder about physics and science and its practical applications. He would jokingly call his desk drawer at the patent office the Bureau of Theoretical Physics. Next year, in 1903, he married Mileva Maric, but it wasn't a happy marriage. Remember, he had fallen for her because of her intellect, because of her ambition. But the very same intellect and ambition now got in the way of the marriage. Mileva was forced to be a housewife. She had to put her intellectual, scientific ambitions on the back burner, and that did not make her a happy woman. And difficulties arose in the relationship. It faltered, it became strained, and finally it ended in divorce. Now, there are reports that they did have a child in that marriage and who died of scarlet fever. Not much is known about that first child of Albert Einstein's. Now the lesson, a truly beautiful mind, now goes into his scientific and professional achievements. In 1905, he published his special theory of relativity. Now what does that mean? Well, scientists can decipher what that means. In a nutshell, he says that, well, the theory says that time and distance are not independent, they are interconnected. Now, what does that mean to us? Well, there is an interesting explanation in the very pages of the textbook Beehive for this chapter. This is the way Einstein explained his special theory of relativity, which says that time and distance are connected. He says, let's look at it this way. If you were to spend 2 hours in the company of a nice girl, the time would seem to you like 2 minutes. On the other hand, if you were to spend 2 minutes seated on a hot stove, that time would seem to one as 2 hours. Got it? I think you do. To you and me, that's what the meaning of the special theory of relativity is. As I said, his marriage to Mileva was faltering and they divorced in 1919, and he married Elsa, his cousin. She was the one who had taken care of him when he had fallen ill a few years ago, and I suppose fine sentiments had developed at that time. Well, those sentiments later blossomed and they got married and they had a very happy married life. That was Elsa. 1915. Einstein publishes his general theory of relativity. In 1919, there was an eclipse of the sun which proved that his general theory of relativity was indeed accurate. 1921 saw him win the Nobel Prize for Physics. Accolades came thick and fast. Newspapers covered him on their front pages. The newspapers vied with one another to get his interviews, get his sound bites, to do shows with him. The actual paparazzi, oh yes, they existed even back then. He was a celebrity, a very good celebrity, a celebrity for all the right reasons, and the newspapers couldn't have enough of him. That's a picture of Einstein with his wife Elsa, his second wife, and his cousin. They seemed very happy together, and indeed they were very happy together. But on the political front, across the globe, the scenario was changing. It saw the rise of Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party in Germany. Now, Einstein was a Jew and Hitler didn't like Jews. Why? Well, because he thought that they were inferior to the so-called Aryan race to which Hitler himself, belonged. And he didn't want any Jews in his nation. He was trying to make Germany a great big nation after their scathing defeat in the First World War, and Jews were not to be part of the plan of the new emerging German nation. There were lots of attacks, lots of harassment in various degrees against Jews, Einstein being one of them. At the same time, however, he was lauded and very much in demand all over the world, especially in the United States of America. Now, this picture here shows Albert Einstein at a reception accorded to him by the Jews in New York. The year was 1921. So he knew that even if he was hounded out of Germany, he would find a home in America. America was waiting for him with wide open arms to welcome him. 1933, the Nazis came to power in Germany, and Einstein thought it best to emigrate, to move permanently and settle down in the United States. This picture shows Albert Einstein taking his oath, pledging his allegiance to the United States of America as their citizen. Things were to get worse on the war front, and the relations between nations were going worse. In 1938, the Germans discovered nuclear fission, which was good news for them, but bad news for Albert Einstein. Remember, he was in the United States, and he was much thought of by the political leaders as well as the intellectuals. He knew what the nuclear fission would portend. He knew that if the Germans were to make a nuclear bomb based on the application of nuclear fission, then the world would be torn apart. He wrote a letter to the American president, the then American president Theodore Roosevelt, saying that if an atomic bomb is detonated, it would destroy not just that specific point or seaport or railway lines, it would devastate the entire region. And he told Roosevelt, the Americans to conduct similar research. But not for one moment did he think that his letter to Roosevelt would take on different dimensions. The Americans themselves listened to Albert's advice and they started their own project, and that was called the Manhattan Project. But quite contrary to what Einstein had foreseen or suspected, the Americans themselves developed the atom bomb, not the Germans. Towards the end of the war, the Second World War in 1945, the Americans dropped the atomic bomb on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the rest, as they say it, is a history, if you'll excuse the pun. What effect did the atomic bomb have on Einstein? He was devastated. He was absolutely shaken to the core. What he did not want to happen, what he had warned the Americans against happening, had happened at the hands of the Americans themselves. He now started to write to the United Nations and to all other people concerned, people in power. He told the United Nations, we must organize a world parliament in which all countries are members so that we don't have this kind of warmongering, this level of destruction anymore ever again amongst us. But did the United Nations listen? Not much. But did that put Einstein off the track? Not at all. On the other hand, he kept on campaigning, kept on talking, kept on traveling, all in the cause of peace and disarmament and against stockpiling of weapons. Till the end of his life, he campaigned for world peace, for people not to use science, not to use physics especially for making weapons. What is the idea of having a beautiful mind if you can't use it for beautiful purposes? Are the ideas, is the great genius brain meant to destroy the human race? Absolutely not. And that was the point that Einstein was trying to make till the last days of his life. He died at the age of 76 in 1955. To this day, more than 65 years later, he still reigns as a world citizen, of course as a scientific genius and as a visionary. He knew that science, if it got out of hand, would turn into a demonic monster which would devour the human race and indeed all plants and animals on earth. And that was a prophetic vision, because we can see how we are destroying Mother Earth thanks to the developments that we make without control. So what is the message of this lesson? A beautiful mind not only creates beautiful ideas, but uses them for the welfare of humanity. And that is what the lesson is all about. I've just given you a brief explanation of the lesson as it meanders through the childhood, school days, university days and professional days of Albert Einstein. It looked at the influences and his achievements. Now we need to have a look at the exercises at the end of the lesson. Here are a few of them. Let's look at some of the questions that might arise from the lesson, the kind of questions that one might be asked to answer to during tests. Let's look at the first question. Why did Einstein write to Roosevelt? The answer is Einstein wrote to Roosevelt because he wanted to warn him about the impending threat of a nuclear weapon from the Germans, who had discovered nuclear fission. He warned Roosevelt, the bomb, if it is dropped, will not devastate just the spot where it has been dropped, but the entire region around the bomb explosion. And he wanted the Americans to conduct research in order to stave off the Germans from dropping the bomb. So it was a letter of warning to Theodore Roosevelt that Einstein wrote. Let's look at the next question. Question number 2. Why did Albert leave the high school in Munich? Now in this answer, the key word to use is strict regimentation, which means rules and protocols which are too strict for people to follow. He left the school because he thought that the school was so strict that it didn't allow room for any kind of creativity or independent thinking when it comes to learning. He didn't like learning by rote. He wanted to be able to learn in the way that he best thought was suitable for him. And he left the school at the age of 15 without completing his high school diploma. Let's now look at question number 3. Why was Einstein's mother Pauline against Mileva? Well, reason 1, Mileva was 3 years older than Einstein. Reason 2, to his mother, Mileva was very much an intellectual. She was just like a book, like her own son Albert. And she didn't think that 2 intellectuals could have a successful marriage. That was the reason she was against the match, and that was the reason that Albert postponed the marriage. Moving on from question answers, we have some exercises to do with the language used in the text. Here you have a few sentences which are taken from the text itself, and you need to find a word from the words given in the brackets which best suit the word given in bold in the question. Let's look at the first sentence. A few years later, the marriage faltered. Now we need to pick a word that is almost similar in meaning to the word faltered. And we have here the phrase became weak, which I have underlined. That is the answer that is most appropriate from the options given in the brackets. Let's look at the second sentence. Einstein was constantly at odds with people at the university. What does at odds mean? Well, the options are bad terms, in disagreement, unhappy. We can go for in disagreement, which is the word or the phrase that is most in similarity to at odds. Now you might ask me, can we also choose on bad terms? Well, a slightly higher level of disagreement is implied by the phrase on bad terms, which is why we chose in disagreement as the substitute for the phrase at odds. Question number 3. The newspapers proclaimed his work as a scientific revolution. Now we need a word to substitute the word proclaimed, and from the options we choose declared. They declared him as a scientific genius. That was an easy one. Let's look at question number 4. Einstein got ever more involved in politics, agitating for an end to the arms buildup. Now what is a substitute that we can use for the word agitating? Well, the options here are campaigning, fighting and supporting, and our correct option is campaigning, working hard for a specific cause. In this case, working hard or campaigning for an end to the arms or weapons buildup. Question 5. At the age of 15, Einstein felt so stifled that he left the school for good. For good. Which phrase can we use, or which word can we use to substitute the phrase for good? And from among the options, let us choose permanently, forever, for good. He left the school. And which school was that? The Leopold Gymnasium at Munich, from where he moved on to the school at Switzerland. Question number 6. 5 years later, the discovery of nuclear fission in Berlin had American physicians in an uproar. In an uproar is the phrase that we're trying to substitute, and from the options, let us choose in a state of commotion, complete chaos. Okay? And this is the word that we can choose, or the collection of words that we can choose to substitute the phrase in an uproar. Your lesson, the Albert Einstein Beautiful Mind lesson, also contains a writing exercise, and in this lesson the writing exercise that has been specified is writing a newspaper report based on clues, and this exercise gives us clues about a document which was written in Einstein's own hand, which was discovered at the University of Leiden. So a few clues are given about the discovery, and we need to write a newspaper report about it. Now the newspaper report has a certain format. You would need to give a title, a place and a date, and then you can have 3 paragraphs. An introduction, and then the main points should be included in the introduction. The why, what, when, where and how should be answered in the first paragraph, and more details can be added in the second and third paragraphs. Let's have a look at the newspaper report based on the clues. Here is the title of the newspaper report: Student unearths Einstein manuscript. Unearths as in discovers. Here we have the date, 21 August 2005. We put a comma there, and then you have the place, Leiden. You can put a colon there, and then you start your report. Here is the first paragraph of the report. An original manuscript handwritten by Albert Einstein has been discovered at the University of Netherlands. It was found by a student, Rowdy Bayanik, when he came across some papers belonging to an old friend of Einstein while carrying out research work. The 16-page document was from 1924 and contained fingerprints of Albert Einstein. It has Einstein's work on his last theory, which was the behavior of atoms at slow temperatures. This phenomenon is now known as the Bose-Einstein condensation. And we can end the newspaper report with a concluding line. The manuscript is preserved at Leiden University. So that was the writing task that has been included in the lesson, A Truly Beautiful Mind, Albert Einstein. Now here are some interesting tidbits which I have included, which aren't in the lesson, but which I thought might interest you. We call them trivia, little facts, little odd facts, which can be interesting to people. Let's have a look at some of them. Big day. Wednesday, November 25th is a big day for fans of scientific breakthroughs. Now, what is a breakthrough? It's a discovery, something of monumental importance, something that's never been known before. Einstein discovered the general theory of relativity in 1915, more than 100 years ago. Okay, when was that date? When was the big day? November 25th. Let's look at the next piece of trivia. Speech. Stanford economist Dr. Thomas Sowell coined the controversial term Einstein syndrome. Okay, now the Einstein syndrome describes people who are exceptionally bright, who are so bright that they don't feel the need to talk and communicate to people because they are observing the world around them. And students or children who have such a character are said to have the Einstein syndrome. Next one, the compass. 5-year-old Albert was mesmerized by a simple compass. This has been noted as the beginning of his fascination with science. He kept looking at the compass, he kept looking at the needle, and he kept wondering, why does that needle always point in the same direction? What is that force that is keeping the needle in that direction? No matter which way I turn, the needle always points in the same direction. What is that force? Magnetic force. And that led him on to discover more and more things about the physical nature of the world. The violin, I had mentioned his love for violin. Einstein's mother started his violin lessons. At first he didn't like it. By the age of 13, he happened to listen to a violin recital of or by Mozart, and he was absolutely enchanted. And he became an avid violinist ever after. Not as a professional, but as an amateur. Einstein for president? President of which country? America? Germany? Switzerland? No, no, no. He was considered for the position of president of Israel. Remember, Israel was made as a new country, as a haven for all the Jews who had lost their homeland during the Holocaust. So he was offered at the age of 73 the presidentship of Israel. Did he accept it? No, he didn't. In his own words, he said that he lacked the natural aptitude and the experience to deal properly with people. You give me physics, you give me machines, you give me atoms, you give me molecules, you give me space and time, I can deal with it. But people, that's a different cup of tea. That's not as queer as folks, as they say, which is why he declined to be the president of Israel. Next fact, Captain Einstein. Now this is to do with Einstein's great love for yachting, going on the sea and on rivers. He wasn't a very good sailor, but that didn't stop him from taking his yacht out every now and then. In fact, he was such a hopeless sailor that he often ended up with the sailboat capsizing, and he had to have his neighbors come and bail him out, literally set his capsized boat upright. It is no wonder that he called his boat Tinef, which is Yiddish for useless. Now there's something in there. Einstein should have known what he was thinking about, what he was talking about when he called his boat useless, or Tinef in Yiddish. But you can't keep a strong man down. Oh no, he kept on sailing. He kept on sailing into further glory, if you might put it that way. No socks. No socks. part of Einstein's charm. We all know how he looks like. All of his iconic photographs show him with his hair all disheveled, okay, never combed, as if electricity had gone through his hair, the complete disheveled, careless look. But what people don't know is that he didn't like to wear socks. Why didn't he like to wear socks? Well, to him, socks were a pain because they tend to get holes, which then one would have to mend. So the best option is to go sockless, just wear your shoes. Who's going to notice, after all? Trivia about Einstein. To end up this lesson, let me quote you an anagram. Now, an anagram is a sentence that can be made from a word. You can include all the letters and make a completely different sentence. Okay, so we take the words Albert Einstein, and from those two words we can make the anagram 10 elite brains. Okay, so in terms of an anagram, the word Albert Einstein can be converted to 10 elite brains. But it also means that Albert Einstein's brain was something like no other person's brain. It has been looked at, it has been put in lab conditions and looked at, and they say that Einstein's brain is much heavier than the normal human brain. Okay? And with that, I come to the end of this lesson. It's been a pleasure teaching this lesson. I hope children or students of class 9 would gain a little bit more information about this lesson, which has been included in the textbook Beehive prescribed by the NCERT for class 9. Thank you very much for listening to me. The pleasure is entirely mine. Thank you.